State-dependent memory. You study drunk. Take the test sober, blank. You knew the material yesterday. Now it's gone. You study sober. Take the test sober, fine. The information was always there, but access depended on matching the state you were in when you learned it. State-dependent memory. When your ability to recall information depends on being in the same physiological or psychological state as when you encode it. Change the state, lose the access. The memory exists. The retrieval pathway is state-locked. This applies to more than substances. Mood matters. You encode memories while anxious. Later, when calm, you can't access them as easily. But when anxiety returns, so do the memories. The emotional state acts as a cue. Without it, the retrieval pathway weakens. Divers demonstrate this cleanly. Learn something underwater. Recall is better underwater than on land. Learn on land. Recall is better on land. The physical environment matters less than the sensory state. Underwater, you're weightless, pressure changes, sounds are muffled. That state becomes part of the memory. On land, the cues don't match, retrieval suffers. Students experience this with caffeine. Study on coffee. The information encodes while your brain is caffeinated. Test day, no coffee. Recall is harder. Not because caffeine directly improves memory. Because the state mismatch creates a retrieval barrier. Your brain is searching in the wrong context. Trauma locks memories this way. A traumatic event happens while you're terrified. The memory encodes with fear as part of its structure. Later, when calm, you might not recall details. But when fear returns, triggered by something unrelated, the traumatic memory floods back. The emotional state reopened the pathway. State-dependent memory isn't absolute. You can still retrieve information across states. It's just harder. The memory is there. The cues are weaker. You might need more prompting, more effort, or a lucky trigger. This creates problems for learning. If you study in one state and perform in another, you're fighting a retrieval disadvantage. It's subtle, but real. Students who study late at night, tired, then take a test in the morning, alert, are accessing memories across a state boundary. The information is less available than it would be if the states matched. Therapy has to account for this. A patient talks through trauma while calm in a therapist's office. They feel like they've processed it. Then the emotional state shifts. Fear returns. Suddenly the memory is back, unprocessed. Because processing in one state doesn't transfer fully to another. The state-dependent lock remains. You're not one person with one memory. You're multiple states, each with slightly different access to your past. What you remember depends on where you are, physically, mentally, emotionally. Change the state, change the memory. Not what's stored, what you can reach. Context-dependent memory. You lose your keys. Can't find them anywhere. You retrace your steps. Go back to where you last remember having them. Stand in the same spot. Look around, and suddenly you remember. They're in your jacket pocket. You were wearing the jacket when you put them there. Being back in that location triggered the memory. Context-dependent memory. When the physical environment where you learned something becomes part of the memory itself. Return to that environment and recall improves. Leave it, and access weakens. The place isn't just background. It's a retrieval cue. Your brain encodes more than information. It encodes where you were when you learned it. The room, the lighting, the sounds, the temperature. All of this gets woven into the memory. Later, when you're in a different environment, those cues are missing. The memory is harder to retrieve, but go back to the original location and the cues reactivate. The pathway opens. Students see this clearly. Study in your room. Take the test in a classroom. The environment doesn't match. The cues you relied on during studying aren't there. Your brain searches for the information in the wrong context. Retrieval suffers. Not catastrophically, but measurably. This works in reverse. Study in the room where you'll take the test. Your brain encodes the information with those environmental cues. Test day, the cues are present. Retrieval is smoother. The context match gives you an advantage. Witnesses experience this during crime scene visits. Police bring them back to the location. Details return. Things they couldn't recall in the station become clear at the scene. The environment reactivates fragments that were context-locked. Not because the witness was hiding information, because the retrieval pathway needed the original cues to function. Relationships rely on this unconsciously. You have meaningful conversations in specific places, a particular cafe, a walking route. Years later, returning to those places brings back the conversations, the emotions, the details. Not because you were actively trying to remember, because the context cued the retrieval automatically. Therapy uses this deliberately. A patient struggling to recall details of a traumatic event might visit the location, not to re-traumatize, to reactivate context-locked memories. The environment provides cues that verbal prompting can't. The memories surface because the context matches. But context dependence creates vulnerability. If you only ever study in one place, your knowledge becomes tied to that environment. Tested elsewhere, you're fighting a retrieval disadvantage. The information is there, the cues aren't. And without cues, access weakens. Memory isn't just what you know, it's where you knew it. Change the where, and the what becomes harder to reach. Mood-Congruent Memory. You're feeling great. Someone asks about your childhood. You remember happy moments, playing outside, family vacations, good times. A week later, you're in a bad mood. Same question. Now you remember arguments, disappointments, lonely afternoons. The childhood didn't change. Your mood did. And with it, what you could recall. Mood-Congruent Memory. When your current emotional state determines which memories are easiest to access. Happy now. You retrieve happy memories. Sad now. Sad memories surface. The past didn't shift, your filter did. The brain organizes memories partly by emotional tone. Positive experiences cluster together. Negative experiences cluster separately. When you're in a positive mood, your brain activates the positive network. Memories tagged with similar emotions become more accessible. The negative network stays quiet. You genuinely can't recall the bad times as easily. Not because they're gone. Because your current mood isn't cueing them. Depression weaponizes this. Depressed mood activates negative memories. Those memories reinforce the depression, which keeps the negative network active, which makes more negative memories accessible. The loop tightens. A depressed person recalls their past as overwhelmingly negative. Not because their past was worse than anyone else's. Because their current mood filters which memories they can reach. Relationships collapse under this. You argue with your partner. Angry. Your brain retrieves every other time they upset you. The memories flood in. You're not trying to build a case against them. Your current anger is activating anger-tagged memories. The good times, inaccessible. Your mood locked them out. Later, you make up. Feel affectionate. Now the positive memories return. You remember why you love them. The conflicts fade, not because you forgive, because your mood shifted the accessible memory set. Both sets of memories exist. Your emotional state determines which one you can reach. Advertising exploits this. Ads try to put you in a good mood. Music, humor, beautiful imagery. While you're feeling positive, you think about the product. That positive mood gets associated with the brand. Later, when you're in a good mood again, the brand memory surfaces more easily. Mood-congruent recall makes the product feel like a good choice. Therapy has to navigate this carefully. A patient recalls their past while in a specific emotional state. The memories they access are mood-filtered. If the therapist doesn't recognize this, they might mistake a mood-congruent selection for the complete picture. The patient isn't withholding. Their mood is curating which memories they can reach. Mood-congruent memory isn't bias, it's architecture. Your emotional state opens certain memory pathways and closes others. What you remember isn't a neutral sample of your past. It's a mood-filtered selection, and the filter changes every time your mood does. Mood-dependent memory. You're anxious, you learn something important. A fact, a conversation. Later when calm you try to recall it. Nothing, you know you learned it, but the memory won't surface. Then anxiety returns, triggered by something unrelated. Suddenly the memory is back, clear, accessible. The information was always there, but retrieval required matching the mood. Mood-dependent memory. When your ability to recall information depends on being in the same emotional state as when you encoded it. Different from mood-congruent. Mood-congruent is about what you remember. Mood-dependent is about whether you can remember at all. The mechanism involves state tagging. When you encode information while anxious, anxiety becomes part of the memory's retrieval queue. Later, when you're calm, that queue is missing. Your brain searches for the memory but can't locate it efficiently. The anxiety tag isn't active. The pathway stays closed. Return to anxiety and the tag reactivates. The memory becomes accessible again. This happens most with emotional learning. You have an important realization during a crisis. The insight is profound, life-changing. But once the crisis passes, you can't recall what the realization was. The calm state doesn't provide the right cues. The memory is mood-locked. Students encounter this with test anxiety. Study while relaxed. Encode the material in a calm state. Test day, anxiety hits. Now you're trying to retrieve calm state memories while in an anxious state. The mismatch creates a retrieval barrier. The information feels gone. It's state locked. If you could calm down, retrieval would improve, but knowing that doesn't help when you're anxious. Trauma survivors experience this intensely. Certain memories only surface when specific emotions are triggered. Fear, anger, shame. In therapy, while calm, the patient might not be able to access those memories. The therapist might think the patient is avoiding. They're not. The memory is genuinely inaccessible in a calm state. It requires the original emotional state to unlock. Mood-dependent memory creates therapeutic challenges. Processing trauma in a calm state might not transfer when the emotional trigger returns. The patient works through the memory while stable, feels resolved. Then the triggering emotion resurfaces. The memory comes back seemingly unprocessed, because the processing happened in a different mood state. The work didn't transfer across the mood boundary. Relationships suffer from this. You have a productive conversation with your partner while both calm. Reach understanding, feel good. Then conflict arises, emotions spike. The calm state understanding becomes inaccessible. You're back to old patterns. Not because you forgot the conversation, because the mood shift locked out the calm state memory. You can't retrieve what you learned when the emotional state doesn't match. Mood-dependent memory means you're not one continuous self with unified access to your past. You're multiple mood states, each with different keys to different parts of your memory. What you can recall depends on matching the emotional lock. Encoding specificity. You meet someone at a conference, exchange names, have a conversation. A week later, you see them at a grocery store. They look familiar, but though you've met, gone. The context is wrong. They're not in business attire, not holding a conference badge, not standing near a registration desk. All the cues you encoded with their name are missing. Without those cues, retrieval fails. Encoding specificity. The principle that memory retrieval is most effective when the cues present at retrieval match the cues present at encoding. The more overlap, the better the recall. Change the cues and access weakens, even if the information is stored perfectly. This isn't about the environment alone. It's about the total constellation of cues. Physical location, emotional state, time of day, what you were thinking about, who you were with. All of this gets encoded alongside the target information. At retrieval, your brain uses whatever cues are available to search. If the current cues don't match the encoding cues, the search is inefficient. Students fight this constantly. You study late at night, tired, hungry. In your room, the test is in the morning, alert, fed. In a classroom, almost nothing matches. The encoding cues and retrieval cues are completely different. Your brain is searching in the wrong context. The information exists. The pathway to it is obscured. This is why practice tests work. They simulate the retrieval environment. You practice recalling information in conditions similar to the actual test. The encoding and retrieval cues align more closely. Performance improves, not because practice tests teach you more, because they create cue overlap. Witnesses struggle with this during identification. They saw the perpetrator in a dark alley, nighttime, scared, running. Now they're in a police station, bright lights, calm, seated, looking at a lineup. The cues don't match. The encoding happened in chaos. The retrieval is happening in control. Their brain can't bridge that gap easily. The face might be in the lineup, but without the original cues, recognition is harder. Encoding specificity explains why smells trigger memories so powerfully. Smell is processed in brain regions closely tied to memory. When a smell is present during encoding, it becomes a strong cue. Later, encountering that smell again provides a direct retrieval pathway. The cue match is so precise that memories flood back. Often memories you thought were completely forgotten. Therapy uses encoding specificity to access difficult memories. A patient can't recall details of a traumatic event. The therapist recreates elements of the original context, not the trauma itself, but contextual cues. The time of day, the season, sensory details. These cues help the brain locate memories that seemed inaccessible. The information was there, the cues weren't. Encoding specificity means memory isn't just about storage strength. It's about cue overlap. You can have a perfectly encoded memory that's completely inaccessible simply because the retrieval environment doesn't match the encoding environment. The memory exists, but without the right cues, you can't reach it. Serial position effect. Read a list. Apple, banana, carrot, donut, eggplant, fig, grape, honey, ice cream, jam. Close your eyes. Recall as many as you can. You'll remember apple and banana. You'll remember ice cream and jam. The middle items, hazy, carrot, donut, eggplant, fig, grape, honey. Some come back, others don't. The position in the list determined what stuck. Serial position effect. When items at the beginning and end of a sequence are remembered better than items in the middle. It's not about the items themselves. It's about when they appeared. First and last get preferential encoding and retrieval. Middle items get lost. The effect splits into two parts: primacy and recency. Primacy is remembering the first items. Recency is remembering the last. Both are strong. The middle is weak. The curve is U-shaped. Performance is high at both ends, low in the center. Why? The first items get more rehearsal. When you hear apple, you repeat it mentally. Then banana. You rehearse apple and banana. Then carrot. You rehearse apple, banana, carrot. The first items get rehearsed repeatedly. That rehearsal strengthens encoding. They move into long-term storage. Later items don't get as much rehearsal. They stay weaker. The last items are still in short-term memory. You just heard them. They're fresh, available. You don't need to retrieve them from long-term storage. They're sitting in active memory ready to report. But they're not encoded strongly. If you wait a few minutes, they fade. Recency is temporary. Primacy lasts. Conversations follow this. The first thing someone says gets remembered. The last thing gets remembered. The middle lost. You meet someone. They introduce themselves, talk for a few minutes, then say goodbye. You remember their opening. You remember their closing line. The middle of the conversation is a blur. Presentations exploit this. Start strong. You'll be remembered. End strong. You'll be remembered. The middle better be essential because it's the part most likely to be forgotten. Presenters who bury key information in the middle lose their audience. Not because the audience stops paying attention, because the middle doesn't encode as well. Advertising uses this. The first ad you see for a product, the most recent ad you saw, both stick. The ones in between, they contribute to familiarity but aren't distinctly remembered. Ad campaigns front-load and back-load their strongest messages. The middle serves to maintain presence, not to create distinct memories. The serial position effect isn't about attention. You're paying attention to the whole list. It's about how memory encodes sequential information. First items get rehearsal advantage. Last items get recency advantage. Middle items get neither. They're encoded, but weakly. And weak encoding means poor retrieval. You can fight this. Deliberately rehearse the middle items. Take notes. Create associations. But if you're passively receiving information, the serial position effect will dominate. You'll remember the start. You'll remember the end. The middle will fade. Primacy effect. First impressions stick. You meet someone. They're warm, friendly, engaging. Later, they do something rude. You forgive it. Dismiss it as an off day. Because the first impression was positive. The rudeness doesn't overwrite it. It's an exception. The initial encoding is too strong. But reverse it. They're cold and dismissive at first. Later, they're kind. You remain wary. The kindness feels like a tactic, an act, because the first impression was negative. It set the frame. Everything after gets filtered through it. Primacy effect. When the first piece of information you receive about something or someone disproportionately influences your overall judgment, later information matters. But it doesn't matter as much. The first data point sets the baseline. Everything else adjusts from there. The mechanism is encoding strength. Early information gets processed more thoroughly. You're paying full attention. You're forming a schema, building a framework. Later information gets fit into that framework. It doesn't rebuild the framework, it populates it. The structure was set by the first information. Everything after is decoration. Teachers see this with students. A student performs well early in the semester. The teacher forms a positive impression. Later, the student underperforms. The teacher attributes it to external factors, bad day, family issues. The early strong performance set the expectation. Deviation gets explained away. But if the student started poorly, improvement is viewed skeptically. Maybe they got lucky. Maybe they cheated. The initial poor performance created a negative frame. Hiring works this way. An interviewer reads a resume, strong credentials at the top, impressive opening. The interview goes well, even weak answers later are forgiven. The candidate already made a good impression. But lead with weak credentials. The interview becomes an uphill battle. Everything the candidate says gets filtered through that initial negative frame. Primacy doesn't mean later information is ignored. It means later information is interpreted through the lens of the first information. If the first information was positive, later positive information reinforces. Later negative information is minimized. If the first information was negative, the pattern reverses. Relationships depend on this. The first few dates set the tone. If they go well, minor conflicts later are overlooked. The relationship has a positive foundation. But if the early dates are rocky, even good moments later feel uncertain. The initial negativity created doubt. Later positivity has to fight against that. Marketing knows this. The first time a customer interacts with a brand matters more than any other interaction. A bad first experience creates lasting damage. A good first experience creates lasting goodwill. Later interactions matter, but they're all filtered through that initial contact. The primacy effect isn't about being closed-minded. It's about how schemas form. The first information builds the framework. Later information fills it in. The framework is harder to change than the content. You can update details, but the structure, once set, resists revision. First matters most. Not because it's better, because it's first. And first is when the framework forms. Recency Effect. Someone reads you a phone number, 7 digits. You repeat the last 3 perfectly. The first few, gone. You heard them, but they didn't stick. The most recent information is still sitting in your mind, fresh, accessible. The earlier digits already faded. You didn't have time to move them into longer storage. They vanished. Recency Effect. The last items in a sequence get remembered best. Not because they're more important. Because they're still in active memory. You just heard them. They haven't been displaced yet. They're available for immediate recall. But that availability is temporary. Wait even a few seconds, and they're gone too. This works differently from primacy. Primacy is about rehearsal and long-term encoding. Recency is about short-term holding. The last items haven't been encoded deeply. They're just sitting there, waiting to be reported. If you're asked to recall immediately, they're perfect. Delay the recall, and they disappear. Recency is powerful but fragile. Conversations exploit this naturally. The last thing someone says sticks. Not because you're paying more attention. Because it's the most recent input. Your brain hasn't had time to overwrite it with new information. Ask someone to summarize a long discussion, and they'll emphasize the final points. The earlier content already faded unless it was particularly striking. Advertising places key messages at the end for this reason. The closing line of a commercial, the final image, the last thing you see before the ad ends. That's what stays with you, briefly, long enough to influence an immediate decision. After that, it fades like everything else in short-term memory. Arguments follow this pattern. The last accusation made, the final thing said before someone storms out, that's what lingers. The earlier parts of the argument blur together. But the closing blow, clear, vivid, it hasn't been displaced yet. Relationships soar over recency. The last interaction dominates the overall feeling. Even if most of the relationship is positive, a bad final encounter colors everything. Teachers see this in lectures. Students remember the closing summary, the wrap-up, the final example. The middle of the lecture, where the core material was taught, gets lost. Instructors who don't reinforce key concepts at the end lose their students. The recency effect guarantees the last few minutes will be remembered. Everything else requires deliberate encoding. Recency doesn't mean understanding. You can remember the last thing you heard without comprehending it. The memory is shallow. It's holding, not learning. If you don't actively process it, encode it, connect it to something, it won't last. Recency gives you seconds, maybe minutes. After that, the memory is gone unless you moved it into longer-term storage. The last thing you hear is the first thing you forget, unless you do something with it. Von Restorff Effect. Table, a list of words. Chair, lamp, couch, desk, cabinet. Later you recall the list, you remember giraffe, perfectly the rest. Harder, giraffe stood out. It didn't belong, and that made it stick. Von Restorff Effect. When something is distinctive, it gets remembered better. Not because it's more important, because it's different. Your brain flags novelty, processes it more deeply. Isolation makes things memorable. The mechanism is attentional. When everything looks the same, your brain processes it in a routine way. Minimal effort. But when something breaks the pattern, attention spikes. Your brain allocates more resources to that item, encodes it more thoroughly. The distinctive item gets special treatment. The similar items get lumped together, processed shallowly. This happens constantly in memory. You meet 10 people to party. 9 are dressed casually. 1 is in a tuxedo. Later you remember the person in the tuxedo, not because they were more interesting, because they were different. The difference created a stronger encoding. Marketing weaponizes this, a page of black and white text. 1 sentence in red. That sentence gets noticed. Remembered, not because it's more valuable, because it violates the pattern. Ads use contrast to hijack attention. The distinctive element becomes the memorable element. Presentations fail when they ignore this. Slide after slide of bullet points, same format, same font, same structure. Nothing stands out. The audience remembers almost nothing. But insert 1 image, 1 bold statement, 1 break in the pattern, that becomes the anchor, the thing people walk away with. Education should use this deliberately, but often doesn't. Lecturing in the same tone for an hour, every point delivered identically. Students retain almost nothing, but change the delivery. Use a surprising example. Pause dramatically. Anything that breaks the monotony. That moment gets encoded. The rest blurs. The effect works in reverse too. If everything is distinctive, nothing is. Highlight every sentence. None of them stand out. Use 10 different fonts. The page becomes noise. Distinctiveness only works when it's selective. Break the pattern once and it's memorable. Break it constantly, and you've just created a new pattern. Memory doesn't prioritize based on importance. It prioritizes based on difference. If you want something remembered, make it stand out. Contrast. Isolationality. These override content. The brain remembers what's different, not what's important. Spacing effect. You study for an exam, cram the night before, 10 hours straight. You know the material cold. Test day, you perform fine. A month later, you remember almost nothing. The information never consolidated. You forced it in, it didn't stick. Try again, study 1 hour a day for 10 days. Spread the same total time over multiple sessions. Test day, you perform equally well. A month later, you still remember. The spacing made the difference. The content is the same. The distribution is what determined retention. Spacing effect. Distributed practice produces better long-term retention than massed practice. Even with identical total study time, it's not about working harder, it's about spreading the work out. Memory consolidates between sessions. Cramming doesn't allow that. Spacing does. The mechanism involves reconsolidation. Every time you recall information, your brain destabilizes it temporarily, then re-encodes it. Each encoding session strengthens the memory trace. Cramming is one massive encoding session. Spacing is multiple smaller sessions. More sessions means more reconsolidation cycles. More cycles means stronger retention. Forgetting plays a role too. When you space practice, you forget a little between sessions. That forgetting is productive. When you restudy, you're not just rehearsing, you're retrieving. Retrieval is effortful. Effort strengthens encoding. Cramming involves no retrieval. Everything is fresh, no effort, weaker encoding. Students resist this. Spacing feels inefficient. Each session requires warming up again, reacquainting yourself with the material. Cramming feels productive. You're in the zone, making progress. But feeling productive and being productive are different things. Cramming optimizes for immediate performance. Spacing optimizes for attention. Language learning demonstrates this clearly. Study vocabulary for 3 hours in one sitting. You'll know the words for the test. A week later, they're gone. Study the same words for 20 minutes a day over 9 days. You'll retain them. The spacing creates durability. Massing creates temporary availability. Even physical skills follow this. Practice a musical instrument for 4 hours once a week. Progress is slow. Practice 30 minutes daily. Progress accelerates. The daily spacing allows consolidation. The weekly massing doesn't. Advertising uses spacing without realizing it. Repeated exposure to the same ad over weeks. Each exposure is brief, but the spacing creates familiarity. You remember the brand. Not because any single ad was memorable, because the spaced repetition built the memory. Spacing feels like you're forgetting between sessions. You are. That's the point. Forgetting creates the opportunity for effortful retrieval. An effortful retrieval is what makes memory last. Testing effect. You're studying. You read the material. Highlight important parts. Reread it. Feel confident. Test day arrives. You struggle. You knew it when you were reading. But recalling it on demand. Different story. Reading created familiarity, not retrieval strength. Try something else. Read the material once, then test yourself. No notes. Just recall. Get things wrong. Check your answers. Test again. This time, you do better. Actual test day. You perform well. The practice tests built retrieval pathways. Reading didn't. Testing effect. Retrieving information strengthens memory more than reviewing it. Even when the retrieval is difficult. Even when you get it wrong. The act of trying to recall builds the pathways you need for future recall. Passive review doesn't. The mechanism is retrieval practice. Every time you pull information from memory, you strengthen the connection. The effort matters. Struggling to recall something, even partially, reinforces it more than reading it again. Your brain is building pathways. Effort builds stronger pathways than ease. Students avoid this. Testing feels hard. Reviewing feels manageable. But manageable doesn't mean effective. Reviewing creates recognition. You see the material and think, I know this. Testing creates recall. You have to generate the answer. That generation is what transfers to actual test performance. The effect works even when you fail. Answer a question wrong on a practice test. Check the correct answer. You'll remember that answer better than if you just read it in the first place. The failed retrieval attempt primed your brain. When the correct answer appears, it encodes more deeply. Failure isn't wasted. It's set up. Flashcards work because of this. Not because they're magic, because they force retrieval. You see a question. You generate an answer. That generation strengthens memory. Reading notes doesn't force generation. It's passive. Passive doesn't build retrieval strength. Teachers sometimes skip this. Lecture, assign reading, assume students will retain it. But retention requires retrieval practice. Without testing, even practice testing, students recognize material without being able to recall it. Recognition isn't enough. Exams require recall, and recall requires practice. The testing effect isn't about assessment. It's about learning. Every retrieval attempt is a learning event. Even failed attempts, even partial attempts, your brain strengthens what you use. Testing forces use. Review doesn't. If you want to remember something, don't just read it. Test yourself on it. The struggle to recall is the mechanism that makes it stick. Generation effect. Someone tells you a fact, you remember it maybe. Someone asks you to figure out the fact yourself. Gives you clues. You work it out, that fact. You remember it, guaranteed. The difference isn't the fact, it's how you got it. Generation effect. Information you generate yourself is remembered better than information you're given. The act of producing the answer creates a deeper encoding. Even if the answer is identical, even if generating it takes more time, self-generated information sticks. The mechanism is elaborative processing. When you generate an answer, you're not just receiving information, you're actively constructing it. Connecting it to what you already know, building relationships. That construction creates multiple retrieval pathways. Receiving information creates one pathway. Generating creates many. This works at every level. Learning vocabulary. Reading definitions produces weak retention. Generating your own example sentences, strong retention. The generation requires deeper processing. You're not just storing the word, you're using it. Students experience this gap constantly. Listen to a lecture, everything makes sense. You follow along, you nod. But later you can't reproduce the reasoning, Because you didn't generate it, you received it. Receiving feels like understanding, but it's recognition, not production. Exams require production, and production wasn't practiced. Problem solving demonstrates this cleanly. Watch someone solve a math problem, step by step. You understand each step. The solution makes sense. Now solve a similar problem yourself. You struggle, because watching isn't generating. You need to produce the steps yourself. That production builds the procedural memory. Observation doesn't. Therapy uses this. A therapist doesn't tell a patient what their problem is. They guide the patient to figure it out. The patient generates the insight. That self-generated realization is more powerful, more memorable than anything the therapist could have told them. Because the patient built it themselves. Creativity depends on this. Passive consumption of ideas doesn't create artists. Active generation does. You have to produce work, not just study it. The generation is what builds the skill. Consuming creates familiarity. Generating creates capability. The generation effect explains why teaching is the best way to learn. When you teach something, you have to generate the explanation, organize it, produce it. That generation forces deep processing, deeper than reading, deeper than listening. Teaching is maximum generation. If you want to remember something, don't just receive it. Generate it. Produce it yourself. The effort of generation is what makes it yours. Levels of processing. You see a word, tree. Someone asks, is it in uppercase? You answer. Later asked to recall the word, you struggle. You processed it shallowly, just looked at the letters. Didn't think about meaning. Different scenario, same word, tree. Someone asks, does it grow in forests? You think about it, picture a tree. Consider where they grow. Answer yes. Later, asked to recall the word. You remember easily. You processed it deeply, engaged with meaning. That depth created a stronger memory. Levels of processing. The depth at which you process information determines how well you remember it. Shallow processing, focusing on surface features, produces weak memories. Deep processing, engaging with meaning, produces strong memories, same information. Different encoding depth, different retention. Shallow processing includes physical features. What does it look like? How many letters? What color? These are surface-level questions. Your brain processes them quickly, minimally. The encoding is weak. You might remember briefly, but long-term retention is poor. Intermediate processing involves sound. Does it rhyme with another word? How is it pronounced? This is deeper than physical features, but still not meaning-based. Retention improves slightly, but not dramatically. Deep processing engages meaning. What does this mean? How does it relate to other concepts? Can I use it in a sentence? When will I encounter this? These questions force semantic processing. Your brain builds connections, creates associations. The encoding is rich, multi-layered. Retention is strong. Students make this mistake constantly, highlighting text, copying notes. These are shallow processes. You're engaging with appearance, not meaning. It feels like studying, but the encoding is weak. Ask yourself meaningful questions about the material instead. Force deep processing. That's what creates retention. Memory techniques work by enforcing deep processing, creating vivid images, building stories, linking new information to existing knowledge. All of these force semantic engagement. They're not magic. They're just structured ways to guarantee deep processing. The effort of processing matters. Deep processing is effortful. You have to think. Shallow processing is easy, automatic, but ease doesn't build memory. Effort does. The more you engage with meaning, the more pathways you create. More pathways means better retrieval. Cramming fails partly because of this. When you cram, you're processing information rapidly. Shallowly, you're getting through it, but you're not engaging deeply. The volume is high, the depth is low. You remember enough for the immediate test. Then it's gone. Deep processing takes time. You can't rush meaning, but the time investment pays off. 1 hour of deep processing beats 10 hours of shallow review. Depth matters more than duration. Memory isn't about repetition, it's about depth. Process deeply once and it sticks. Process shallowly 100 times and it fades. Depth is the mechanism. Everything else is just window dressing. Self-reference effect. Two people study the same vocabulary list. One person is told to memorize the definitions. The other is told to think about how each word relates to their own life. Same words. Same amount of time. Test day arrives. The second person remembers twice as much. Not because they're smarter, because they made it personal. Self-reference effect. Information related to yourself is remembered better than information processed impersonally. Link something to your own experience and it sticks. Keep it abstract and it fades. The content doesn't change. The connection to you does, and that connection is the difference. Your brain prioritizes self-relevant information, makes sense evolutionarily. Things connected to you, your survival, your relationships, your goals, matter more than random facts. So when you encode information with a self-reference, your brain treats it as important, allocates resources, creates deeper, richer connections. This works at every level. Learning someone's name. Hard. Learning someone's name while thinking about how they remind you of someone you know. Easy. The self-reference creates an anchor. The name connects to your existing network. Without that connection, it's just a label. Floating and moored. Students who personalize material retain it better. Reading about historical events, forgettable. Reading about historical events while considering how you have reacted in that situation. Memorable. The self-insertion forces deeper processing. You're not passively receiving, you're actively relating. The effect extends to preferences. You like things more when they're connected to you. Your birthday number, your initials, cities you've lived in. The connection to self creates positive bias. And that bias strengthens memory. You don't just remember it better, you care about it more. Marketing exploits this relentlessly. Ads that make you picture yourself using the product. That ask you to imagine how it fits into your life. These create self-reference. The product stops being abstract. It becomes part of your mental simulation. And that simulation makes it memorable. Therapy leverages this naturally. Patients remember insights they generate about themselves. Not general principles, the therapist explains. The self-relevance makes the realization stick. An abstract idea about human behavior, forgotten by next week. The same idea applied to your own life, that stays. The mechanism is elaboration. When you connect information to yourself, you're building multiple links. To your experiences, your emotions, your existing knowledge, those links create redundancy. Many pathways to the same information. If one pathway fails, others remain. Self-reference is memory insurance. Want to remember something? Make it about you. The more personal the connection, the stronger the memory. Abstract information floats away. Personal information sticks. Proactive interference. You've driven the same route to work for years. Turn left at the light, straight for 3 blocks, right at the coffee shop, automatic. Then you move offices, new route. Turn right at the light, different streets, different landmarks. But every morning, you catch yourself starting the old route. The new path is correct. Your brain defaults to the old one. Proactive interference. When old memories interfere with learning new ones. The prior information doesn't disappear. It intrudes, competes, makes the new information harder to encode and retrieve. Your brain keeps pulling up what it already knows. The old pattern blocks the new one. This happens because memory pathways strengthen with use. The old route was driven hundreds of times. That repetition created a strong automatic pathway. The new route, fresh, weak. When your brain searches for grout to work, it finds the old one first. Every time, the old memory is proactive. It reaches forward, interferes with what comes after. Language learners experience this constantly. You study French in school. Years later, you try to learn Spanish. Similar grammar, overlapping vocabulary. But every time you try to recall a Spanish word, French intrudes. The French pathway is older, stronger. It activates first. The Spanish has to fight through that interference to surface. Phone numbers demonstrate this clearly. You had the same number for years, memorized it completely. Now you have a new one. Someone asks for your number. The old one comes out. Automatically, you know it's wrong, but your brain retrieved it anyway. The old memory interfered proactively with the new one. Passwords follow the same pattern. Change your password. The new one is supposed to replace the old. But when you try to log in, your fingers type the old password. Muscle memory interferes. The old pattern is so ingrained that the new one can't overwrite it cleanly. The interference is strongest when information is similar. Learning 2 unrelated things. Minimal interference, learning 2 similar things. Maximum interference. Your brain confuses them. retrieves the wrong one. The similarity creates competition, and the older memory usually wins. Proactive interference doesn't mean the new information wasn't learned. It's there, encoded, but retrieval is blocked. The old memory gets in the way. You know the new password, you know the new route, but accessing them requires pushing past the old information first. This is why breaking old habits is hard. The old behavior isn't forgotten, it's just suppressed. And suppression requires effort. Every time you perform the new behavior, the old one is sitting there ready to intrude. The old pathway is still active. It doesn't go away just because you built a new one. Proactive interference means your past is always present, fighting for access, blocking what comes next. Retroactive interference. You learned something years ago, remembered it perfectly. Then you learned something new, related, similar. Now when you try to recall the old information, it's corrupted. The new learning didn't just add to your knowledge, it damaged what was already there. Retroactive interference. When new learning disrupts old memories. The new information reaches backward, interferes with what you already knew. You didn't forget the old material naturally. The new material overwrote it. This happens because memory isn't isolated. Related information shares neural pathways. When you encode something new, you're not adding to a blank space. You're modifying an existing network. The new information integrates, but integration isn't always clean. Sometimes the new material displaces the old. Sometimes it blends with it. Either way, the original memory is altered. Students see this with cumulative subjects. You learn a concept in Chapter 1, understand it, master it. Then Chapter 2 introduces a related but slightly different concept. Suddenly, when tested on Chapter 1, you struggle. The Chapter 2 material interfered. It didn't replace the Chapter 1 memory, but it confused it, blurred the boundaries, made retrieval harder. Language learning shows this in reverse from proactive interference. You know English well. You learn French, vocabulary, grammar, immerse yourself. Years later, certain English words feel slightly off. You hesitate. Not because you forgot English, because French interfered retroactively. The new language slightly corrupted the old one. Eyewitness memory degrades this way. A witness sees a crime, encodes the memory. Later they watch news coverage, read articles, talk to other witnesses. All of that new information interferes retroactively with the original memory. What they recall at trial isn't the pure original. It's a blend. The original memory damaged by everything that came after. Relationships experience this painfully. Early memories of a partner are positive, happy. Then the relationship soars, conflict, betrayal, hurt. Now when you recall those early memories, they feel different, tainted. The positive emotion is weaker. You see warning signs that weren't there originally. The later experiences interfered retroactively. The early memories didn't change. Your access to them did. Retroactive interference is why studying similar subjects back to back is difficult. Chemistry, then physics. History of Rome, then history of Greece. The second subject interferes with the first. The information blends. Details confuse. You need spacing, time for the first topic to consolidate before the second one intrudes. The interference can be minimized but not eliminated. Sleep helps. Consolidates memories before new information comes in. Spacing helps, reduces overlap. But complete protection isn't possible. Every new memory you form has the potential to interfere with old ones. Learning is construction, but it's also destruction. New information doesn't just add, it rewrites. And sometimes, what gets rewritten is what you thought you'd never forget. Transience. You meet someone at a party, exchange names, have a brief conversation. An hour later you see them again. Their name is gone. You remember meeting them. You remember the conversation vaguely. But the name vanished. You didn't actively forget, it just faded, naturally, inevitably. Transience. The gradual decay of memory over time, not interference, not suppression, just erosion. Memories weaken, blur. Eventually, they disappear. The passage of time alone is enough. You don't need to learn conflicting information. You don't need to avoid rehearsal. Time does the work. The decay curve is steep at first. You learn something. Within minutes, you've lost details. Within hours more, within days, the memory is fragmentary. A few pieces remain, the rest is gone. The curve flattens eventually. What survives the first few days tends to stick longer. But nothing is permanent. Even strong memories fade, just slower. This is why cramming fails long term. You force information in the night before. Test day, it's accessible. A week later, gone, transience erased it. The information never consolidated properly. It was held temporarily. When the temporary holding period ended, the memory decayed. Transience isn't malfunction, it's design. Your brain can't keep everything. Storage is limited. Retrieval is limited. If every experience was permanently encoded, your memory would be cluttered. Useless. Transience clears space, removes what isn't used, what isn't important, what isn't rehearsed. But transience is indiscriminate. It doesn't just remove trivia, it removes meaningful memories too. Conversations with loved ones, moments you wanted to keep, details you thought were locked in. Time erodes them all. Importance slows the decay, but it doesn't stop it. Childhood memories fade this way, not because of amnesia, because of transience. You formed those memories, but decades passed. Without rehearsal, they decayed. What remains are fragments, disconnected images, emotions without context. The narrative is gone, eroded by time. Even recent memories show transience. Yesterday's lunch, last week's meeting, the conversation you had this morning. Ask yourself for details. They're already fading. You remember the gist. The specifics are blurry. That's transience working in real time. Rehearsal fights transience. Every time you recall a memory, you slow its decay. Reconsolidation refreshes it. But stop rehearsing, and decay resumes. Memories you don't use weaken. Memories you use survive. Transience is the default. Maintenance is the exception. Some memories resist transience better than others. Emotional memories. Traumatic memories. First experiences, these decay slower. The emotional weight creates stronger encoding. More connections. More redundancy. But even these aren't immune. Given enough time, even the strongest memories fade. Transience is why nostalgia feels incomplete. You remember pieces, feelings, images, but the full experience is gone. Time took it. Gradually, silently. What you have left are fragments, and the knowledge that there was once more. Absentmindedness. You walk into a room. Stop. Why did you come in? You had a reason, a clear intention. But standing here now, you have no idea. The purpose vanished, not because you forgot it permanently, because you weren't paying attention when you formed it. Absentmindedness. Memory failures caused by lack of attention during encoding or retrieval. You never fully committed the information. It was processed shallowly, automatically, and shallow processing produces weak memories. If you don't attend to something, you don't remember it. Simple as that. This happens constantly with routine tasks. Did you lock the door? Turn off the stove? Set the alarm? You perform these actions, but automatically, without conscious attention. So when you try to recall them, there's nothing to retrieve. The action happened. The memory didn't form. Keys are the classic example. You put them down, somewhere, but you weren't paying attention to where. Your mind was elsewhere. The location never encoded. Later, when you search for them, you can't recall. Not because the memory faded, because it never existed. Absentmindedness prevented encoding. Introductions suffer from this. Someone tells you their name, but you're thinking about what to say next, planning your response, not listening. The name doesn't encode. Seconds later, it's gone. You blame your memory. But attention was the problem. You never processed it. Multitasking guarantees absent-mindedness. You're reading while half watching TV. Later, asked about either, you struggle. Neither received full attention. Both encoded weakly. Divided attention produces divided memory, or no memory at all. This is different from other memory failures. It's not decay, it's not interference. It's encoding failure. The memory system never got the information in the first place. You can't forget what you never learned, and you can't learn without attention. Absentmindedness increases with cognitive load. When your mind is full, busy, stressed, attention falters. Important information gets processed automatically. Shallowly later, you can't recall. Not because your memory is failing, because your attention failed first. Age amplifies this. Older adults experience more absent-mindedness. Not because their memory storage is worse, because their attentional resources are limited. They can remember perfectly if they attend, but attention becomes harder to sustain, harder to focus, so encoding suffers. The solution is simple but difficult. Pay attention, deliberately. Consciously, notice what you're doing when you do it. Encode the moment, Don't let it pass automatically, because automatic processing produces no memory, and no memory means absent-mindedness wins. You can't remember what you never noticed, and you notice less than you think. Blocking. The answer is right there. You know it, you can feel it, it's close, so close. But you can't access it. The harder you try, the worse it gets. The information exists. Your brain has it, but the pathway is blocked, temporarily, frustratingly, completely. Blocking. When retrieval is prevented even though the memory is intact. The information is stored. You know it's stored. You just can't get to it. The block isn't permanent, it's temporary. But while it's active, the memory is unreachable. This often happens with names. You see someone. You know them. You can picture where you know them from. You can recall conversations. But their name blocked. Your brain searches, finds nothing. The name is there. The retrieval pathway is closed. Tip of the tongue is a form of blocking. Your pathway there. You have fragments. The first letter. The number of syllables. Similar sounding words. But the target word blocked. The fragments interfere. They occupy the retrieval pathway. The actual word can't get through. Stress amplifies blocking. High-pressure situations. Test presentations. Interviews. The information you need is blocked precisely when you need it most. The stress activates competing pathways. Creates noise. The signal you're searching for gets lost in the interference. Blocking is temporary. Stop trying and the block lifts. The answer appears. Minutes later, hours later. When you've moved on, your brain kept searching in the background. Found the pathway when you stopped forcing it. The effort was the problem. Relaxation was the solution. But you can't relax on command, especially when you need the information now, so blocking creates a trap. The more you need the memory, the more you try. The more you try, the worse the block. The anxiety feeds the interference. The interference strengthens the block. Similar memories increase blocking. You're trying to recall one person's name. Another name, similar, keeps surfacing. That similar name blocks the target. Your brain offers it repeatedly. Each time it strengthens. And each time it makes the correct name harder to access. Blocking doesn't mean the memory is weak. You can have a perfectly strong memory that's temporarily inaccessible. The storage is fine. The retrieval is impaired. The pathway is there. It's just congested. Crowded with competing information. The signal can't get through. Sometimes blocking becomes chronic. The same information gets blocked repeatedly. Each failed retrieval reinforces the block. The pathway becomes associated with failure. Accessing it triggers the block automatically. What was temporary becomes persistent. Blocking is proof that memory isn't just storage, it's retrieval. And retrieval can fail even when storage is perfect. The information exists. You know it exists. But knowing doesn't help. Because the pathway, not the destination, is the problem. You know the answer. Your brain won't tell you. And trying harder just makes the block stronger. Suggestibility. A therapist asks if you remember feeling unsafe as a child. You don't, not specifically. But the question lingers. Over sessions, you explore it. Picture scenarios. Imagine how it might have felt. Gradually, something shifts. You start remembering moments, vague at first, then clearer. By the end of therapy, you recall specific incidents. Your childhood felt unsafe. You remember it now, vividly. Except it didn't happen. The suggestion planted a seed. Your imagination watered it. Repetition made it grow. What started as a question became a memory. Not because you're suggestible in a weak sense. Because memory is suggestible by design. It accepts input. And it doesn't always distinguish between input from experience and input from suggestion. Suggestibility. When external information, suggestions, or leading questions alter or create memories. The suggestion doesn't need to be forceful. It can be subtle. A phrasing, a tone, an implied expectation. Your brain treats it as data, integrates it. And over time, the suggestion becomes indistinguishable from original experience. Children are especially vulnerable. Ask a child, did the bad man touch you? Versus, did anyone touch you? The first question contains a suggestion, a bad man. The child's brain processes that. Even if no one touched them, the suggestion of a bad man gets encoded. Later questioning reinforces it. Eventually the child might report a bad man, not because they're lying, because the suggestion created a framework. Their brain filled it in. Witnesses experience this during investigations, leading questions. How fast was the car going when it smashed into the other car? The word smashed suggests violence, high speed. The witness adjusts their memory to match, not consciously, automatically. The suggestion reshapes recall. Advertising relies on this constantly. Suggest that you've always wanted this product, that you've been thinking about this problem, that you need this solution. Repeat it enough and you start remembering wanting it. The desire feels original. It's not. It was suggested, then encoded as memory. Relationships decay through suggestibility. A friend says, "You always do this." You don't, but the suggestion gets you thinking, have you? Maybe you have. You search your memory for examples, find a few. Suddenly, you remember always doing this. The pattern was suggested. Your brain confirmed it. Retroactively, false memories are often suggested memories, not elaborate fabrications. Simple suggestions that your brain accepted and built into full narratives. A therapist suggests abuse. A lawyer suggests a detail. A friend suggests a motive. Your brain takes the suggestion and runs with it, constructs a memory around it. That memory feels real because, to your brain, it is real. The suggestion became experience. The frightening part is invisibility. You don't feel like someone suggested this to you. You feel like you remember it. The suggestion bypassed your critical filter, got encoded as fact, and now it's part of your past. A past that never happened, but a past you'll defend as true. Suggestibility doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Your brain is designed to integrate information. It can't always verify the source, so it accepts. And acceptance, once it happens, is nearly impossible to reverse. Bias. You always knew your ex was selfish. From the beginning, even back when you were happy. Looking back now, the signs were obvious. That time they chose their plans over yours, the way they talked about their needs. It was clear. You saw it then, you just ignored it. Did you? Memory bias. When your current beliefs, emotions, or knowledge reshape how you remember the past. You're not inventing memories, you're reinterpreting them. The events happened, but your current perspective colors them, makes them fit your present understanding. What you remember isn't what happened. It's what happened, filtered through who you are now. The past doesn't stay fixed, it shifts with you. When your relationship was good, you remembered your partner fondly. The same behaviors you now call selfish. You called them confident, independent. The framing changed, not the events. The events are written by the frame. Political beliefs demonstrate this clearly. People remember voting for candidates they didn't actually vote for. Once their political views shift, their past votes shift too. They genuinely believe they always held their current position. The old vote doesn't fit the current identity, so memory adjusts it, rewrites it, makes it consistent. This happens with personal growth too. You overcome a challenge, become stronger. Looking back, you remember being weaker than you were. The contrast makes your growth feel more dramatic. You're not lying about your past self. Your current self is biasing the memory, making the before worse to make the after better. Bias works in reverse. Fail at something. Your self-esteem drops. Suddenly you remember always struggling, always being bad at this. The past successes blur, the failures sharpen. Your current state of failure reshapes your entire history. You've always been this way, except you haven't. Bias is rewriting. Relationships live and die by this. When things are good, you remember mostly good times. When things are bad, you remember mostly bad times. The actual ratio of good to bad hasn't changed. Your memory's filter has. The current emotional state determines which memories surface, which details get emphasized, which interpretations feel true. Therapy has to navigate this carefully. A patient in a depressive episode remembers their entire life as depressing. That's not accurate. That's bias. The depression is filtering retrieval, pulling up negative memories, suppressing positive ones. The past isn't as uniformly dark as it feels. The present is dark, and the present is rewriting the past to match. Bias isn't conscious distortion. You're not trying to rewrite history. It happens automatically. Your brain maintains consistency. Current beliefs need to align with past experiences. If they don't, the brain adjusts the past, smooths the contradiction, makes everything coherent, even if coherence requires rewriting what actually happened. You don't remember the past as it was. You remember the past as it needs to be, for your current self to make sense. persistence. You want to forget, desperately. The moment replays over and over, you push it away, it comes back. You distract yourself. It intrudes, you try to move on. It follows. The memory won't leave, intrusive, unwanted, persistent. And the more you try to suppress it, the stronger it becomes. Persistence, when memories you want to forget keep returning, intruding, dominating your thoughts. Not because you're dwelling on them, because your brain won't let them go. The memory is stuck, activated repeatedly, refusing to fade. Trauma creates this most powerfully. A traumatic event gets encoded with extreme emotional intensity. Fear, pain, shock. That intensity makes the memory strong. Too strong. It doesn't decay normally. It persists, intrudes, becomes a flashback. The person isn't choosing to remember. The memory is forcing itself forward. The mechanism involves emotional arousal. High emotion during encoding creates a strong memory trace. Normally that's useful. Important events should be remembered. But when the event is traumatic, the strong trace becomes a problem. The memory is too accessible, too easily triggered. A smell, a sound, a place. Any cue can activate it. And once activated, it floods consciousness. Trying to suppress makes it worse. When you actively try not to think about something, you're monitoring for it, checking whether it's intruding. That monitoring keeps the memory active. The suppression effort paradoxically reinforces the very thing you're trying to forget. The memory becomes more persistent, not less. Intrusive thoughts follow this pattern. An embarrassing moment, a mistake, a regret. You want to stop thinking about it. But the desire to stop makes you check. Am I still thinking about it? The check reactivates it. You're thinking about it again. The cycle continues. Persistence feeds on suppression. Grief demonstrates this painfully. You lose someone, you want to move forward, but memories of them intrude. Constantly, you're not trying to remember, the memories come unbidden, triggered by everything, a song, a place, a routine. The persistence isn't pathological, it's the brain processing loss, but it's exhausting, relentless. The only way to reduce persistence is counterintuitive. Stop suppressing. Allow the memory. Let it surface without fighting it. The fight is what keeps it active. Acceptance reduces its power, not immediately, but gradually. The memory still intrudes, but less forcefully, less frequently. Therapy for trauma works this way. Exposure. Controlled recall. The patient faces the memory repeatedly, in a safe environment. The repeated exposure doesn't erase the memory, but it changes how it's encoded, reduces the emotional intensity, weakens the automatic intrusion. The memory persists, but it loses its grip. Persistence isn't a memory malfunction. It's the system working as designed. Intense experiences get remembered intensely. They persist. The problem is when persistence outlasts usefulness. When the memory that was supposed to protect you becomes the thing you need protection from. Some memories refuse to be forgotten. Not because you won't let go, because they won't let go of you. Explicit memory. Someone asks what you had for breakfast, you think back. Picture the kitchen, the food. You recall it, report it, toast, coffee, an egg. You consciously retrieved that information, brought it to awareness, described it. That's explicit memory working. Explicit memory. Conscious recollection of facts and events. When you know that you know something, and you can report it. It's the memory you're aware of using, the kind you search for deliberately, the kind you can describe. This splits into two types, episodic and semantic. Episodic is personal events, your breakfast this morning, your last vacation, the conversation you had yesterday. Semantic is facts, the capital of France. What an elephant is, how to spell your name. Both require conscious awareness. Both are explicit. The brain regions involved are specific. The hippocampus encodes episodic memories, transfers them to long-term storage. Damage the hippocampus, and new episodic memories don't form. You can still recall old ones, but new experiences don't stick. The encoding pathway is broken. Semantic memory is more distributed. Facts aren't tied to a specific episode. You know Paris is the capital of France, but you don't remember learning it. The fact exists independently. That independence makes semantic memory more durable, less vulnerable to decay. Facts outlast experiences. Explicit memory is effortful. You have to search, retrieve, reconstruct. It's not automatic. You're aware you're remembering. The awareness is the key feature. If you don't know you're using memory, it's not explicit. Testing relies on this: recall tests, recognition tests. You're asked to consciously retrieve information, bring it to awareness, report it. The test measures explicit memory, how well you can deliberately access what you know. Amnesia targets explicit memory. Someone with amnesia can't form new explicit memories. They meet you, forget you immediately, can't recall the conversation, can't learn new facts consciously. But their implicit memory, the unconscious kind, often remains intact. They can learn skills, form habits. Without any awareness, they're learning. Explicit memory is what most people mean when they say memory. The conscious kind, the kind you know you have. But it's only part of the system. Implicit memory, the unconscious kind, operates alongside it, often more powerfully, but invisibly. You remember what you're aware of remembering. Everything else is still there, just hidden. Implicit memory. You don't like someone. You're not sure why. They haven't done anything wrong, but something about them makes you uneasy. You avoid them. Instinctively. Later, you realize. They remind you of someone from your past. Someone who hurt you. You didn't consciously recognize the similarity, but your brain did, and it influenced your behavior without your awareness. Implicit memory. Unconscious memory that affects behavior without conscious recollection. You don't know you're using it. You don't feel like you're remembering. But the past is guiding your present. Automatically. Below awareness. This includes skills. Riding a bike, typing. Driving. You perform these without thinking. The memory is in your muscles, your reflexes. You can't describe how you do it, you just do. That's implicit procedural memory. Learned through practice. Stored unconsciously. Priming is another form. You see the word yellow. Later asked to name a fruit, you say, banana. Faster than you would have otherwise. The word yellow, primed banana. You don't remember seeing yellow, but it influenced your response. That's implicit memory at work. Emotional associations operate this way. You walk into a room. Feel anxious. You don't know why. The room reminds your brain of somewhere you felt anxious before. The association is unconscious, but the emotion is real. Implicit memory triggered it. Preferences are often implicit. You like certain brands, certain styles, certain people. You think it's personal taste, but exposure history drives it. Things you've encountered repeatedly feel familiar. Familiar feels good. You prefer them, without remembering why. Implicit memory shaped the preference. Trauma survivors experience this intensely. A smell, a sound, a tone of voice triggers fear. The person doesn't consciously remember the trauma at that moment, but their body reacts. Heart races, muscles tense. Implicit memory activated the fear response, without explicit recall. This is why exposure therapy works. Repeated safe exposure to the trigger. Gradually, the implicit association weakens. The trigger stops activating fear automatically. Not because the person forgot the trauma, because the implicit memory pathway was rewritten. Habits are implicit. You perform them without thinking. Morning routine. Driving rote, responses to stress. You're not consciously recalling how to do these things. You're not aware you're using memory, but the behavior is memory-driven, learned. Stored. Executed automatically. Implicit memory is powerful because it's invisible. You don't question it. You don't second-guess it. It feels like instinct, like preference, like personality, but it's history. Encoded unconsciously. Shaping your present without your awareness. You're influenced by things you don't remember. And the influence is stronger because you don't remember it. Episodic memory. You remember your 10th birthday party, the cake, the guests. The moment you blew out the candles, you can see it, feel it. Place yourself in that moment. That's episodic memory. The record of your personal experiences. The story of your life, what happened to you, when, where, how it felt. Episodic memory is time-stamped. It's not just information. It's information embedded in a specific time and place. You don't just know you had a birthday party. You remember being there. The perspective is first person. The memory is yours. This makes episodic memory fragile. It's tied to context. When context changes, retrieval weakens. You remember events from your childhood, but the details are sparse. The context is too distant. Time and change eroded the specifics. What remains are fragments, the gist, the feeling. The narrative is reconstructed. Episodic memory is what makes you continuous. You remember yesterday week, last year. That continuity creates identity. You're the person who experienced those things. The timeline of episodes defines who you are. Without episodic memory, you'd be disconnected, each moment isolated. No thread linking your past self to your present. But episodic memory is reconstructive. You're not replaying a recording. You're rebuilding the event from pieces. Each rebuild introduces changes, small distortions, gaps filled with plausible details. The memory feels accurate. It's not. It's a reconstruction. And reconstructions drift from originals. This is why eyewitness testimony is unreliable. Witnesses have episodic memories of the crime. First person, timestamp detailed. But those details are reconstructed, influenced by suggestion, by other memories, by expectations. The episodic memory feels direct, authentic. It's not. It's a narrative your brain built. And narratives change. Alzheimer's attacks episodic memory first. Patients lose recent experiences, can't form new episodes. The past remains for a while, but the present doesn't stick. Each day is disconnected. The continuity breaks, identity fragments, because identity is episodic memory. And episodic memory is failing. Nostalgia is episodic memory filtered through emotion. You remember the good times, the episodes that make you smile. The difficult times fade, not because they didn't happen, because emotional bias selects which episodes surface. The past you remember isn't the past you lived. It's the past your current mood allows you to access. Episodic memory is the most personal form of memory. It's your story. But stories aren't recordings. They're interpretations, built from fragments, shaped by emotion, changed with each retelling. The episodes you remember define you. But they're not fixed, they're fluid, constantly rewritten, constantly adjusted. You are your episodic memories. But your episodic memories aren't what actually happened. They're what you've reconstructed. And every reconstruction moves a little further from the truth.